So I'll only teach you the concepts now. Okay. So the next 1 hour, you will be doing the example problems from this book. Okay. Once you finish that, I'll give you a test also in the app, which you have to try. Okay. So kinematics, you have learned it, right? Last year you would have learned it. So you know what is kinematics? It is basically motion in 1 dimension and 2 dimension. Right? So motion in 1 dimension and 2 dimension is called as kinematics. Is basically about a branch of physics which deals only with motion and not concerned about the cause. So if you're able to talk about a branch of physics which deals only with the motion of an object and it is not concerned about the cause which is making that object move, then you call it as kinematics. Okay. So you talk about this motion in 1 dimension and 2 dimension, you have certain terms to be known. The first one is distance, displacement, speed, velocity, and acceleration. See, these are all not new terms to you. Distance is the total path length. Displacement is the shortest path length. Right? It is the shortest path length. Speed is distance traveled per unit time. Okay, velocity is displacement per time. Acceleration, velocity by time. Okay. So when you talk about speed, you write it as distance traveled by the object divided by t, or you can write it as d divided by t, which is written as, we'll call it as v itself. Okay. Similarly, velocity is represented with the symbol v. Okay, and you can write this as s divided by t. Okay. So when you talk about velocity, there are 2 types of velocity we can speak about. One is called as average velocity, and the second is called as instantaneous velocity. So when you talk about average velocity, it is the rate of change of displacement. When you talk about instantaneous velocity, it is the rate of change of instantaneous displacement. So you need to differentiate when you're asked about instantaneous value. You need to find the slope, or you need to find the difference and divide it with the difference when you're asked about the average value. So same thing is applicable for acceleration as well. Average acceleration is delta v divided by delta t, and instantaneous acceleration is dv divided by dt. You're able to understand this? So this is how it works. Okay. Next. So you can do all the problems from examples. Okay. So there is something called as average speed. Average speed is total distance traveled by total time. This I told you, right? Average distance is equal to total distance by total time taken. Okay. Then what about average velocity? It is the total displacement divided by total time. When you say displacement, you need to take the direction also into consideration. Right? When you calculate the distance, you will only be adding the scalar part, whereas when it comes to displacement, you will be adding the directions as well. It means you need to start writing them in the form of a vector. Right? Next is, when you talk about the kind of motions that we have uniform motion and you have non-uniform motion. So what do you mean by uniform motion? Uniform motion is distance covered in equal intervals of time. Okay, then what about non-uniform motion? Unequal distances covered in equal intervals of time. Okay, so under non-uniform motion you have uniformly accelerated motion and non-uniformly accelerated motion. So I hope it is not confusing, right? So all these things you already know. I'm just revising it. So uniformly accelerated motion under that. So when I say uniformly accelerated motion, A is a constant. Okay, right? So when I talk about uniform motion, V is equal to constant and acceleration is 0. You know this? So in uniform motion, velocity is constant, but acceleration is 0. In non-uniform motion, velocity is not constant and acceleration is also not equal to 0. So this is what uniform. So there is the difference between uniform motion and uniformly accelerated motion. So when you have acceleration is equal to constant, then you can apply these three equations. So V is equal to U plus AT, S is equal to UT plus half AT square, and V square minus U square is equal to 2AS. So while you are applying them, the only concern is you need to be clear about sign. So, charger. You need to be clear about the sign. So if you take one of the directions to be positive, then the other direction will by default be negative. So when you talk about uniformly accelerated motion, it can happen either along the horizontal line or along the vertical. So horizontal means generally we speak about a car moving, a cyclist moving on a road, those kind of problems. Vertically means an object traveling under the influence of gravity, which you call it as free fall. So free fall need not be dropping everything. If an object is traveling under the influence of gravity, we call it as free fall. Okay. So generally what happens is when you talk about vertical motion, I take upwards as positive and downward as negative, but there is no hard and fast rule that this is the scenario you need to follow. So if you take upward as negative, you're free to do that. You need to take downward to be positive. You need to have one of the directions as positive and one to be negative. That is what you need to follow throughout. You should not stop it anywhere. Okay. So this is how it works. Am I clear with this? Yes. Apart from this, then you have 1 minute. Hello. Good morning, ma'am. Good morning. Yeah, all good, ma'am. Ma'am, in over 15-20 minutes, call our class. Sure. Thank you. So when you talk about non-uniformly accelerated motion, then what happens? Then you need to follow the instantaneous value. A is equal to dv by dt. From here, you will use variables and separables. You have learned differential equations, right? Yeah, variable separable method. You will take dv on one side and dt on other side. So when I say non-uniformly accelerated motion, generally acceleration will be a function of time. Okay. So for example, they gave A is equal to 5t square plus 2t. Then they ask you to calculate the change in velocity between 2 seconds and 5 seconds. So what are the change in velocity taking place? Okay. So then what you will do is you will write dv is equal to 5t square plus 2t times dt. Integrate on both the sides. T is equal to 2 seconds to 5 seconds, v1 to v2. So integral of dv is v. So v2 minus v1 will be equal to 5 into t cube by 3 between 2 to 5 plus 2 into t square by 2 between 2 to 5. You know how to solve it. Okay. So that will give you the difference in the velocity between this time interval. Okay. So when you talk about a non-uniformly accelerated motion, use calculus. That is what I'm trying to say. So this is for variable acceleration. So when I talk about variable acceleration, you will leave it as it is. Okay. So when it comes to competitive exams, mostly, especially JEE and all, they will test this part. They'll not ask you, give you a simple question and say solve it. Okay. So we need to be good with this. Okay. These are all the concepts that are related to kinematics, especially when you talk about uniform motion, non-uniform motion, uniformly accelerated motion and non-uniformly accelerated motion. Okay. So I hope it is clear till this point, right? Yes. So the next concept that we need to understand is relative velocity. So generally, there is a misconception that relative is applicable only for velocity. No. Relative in physics means comparative study. Okay, relative. So how high or short the person is with respect to another. So when you use the word with respect to, you start doing a comparative study. So under comparative study, we can either talk about relative displacement, we can talk about relative velocity, we can talk about relative acceleration. Anything can be done. Okay. So when you have problems based on relative velocity, the formula is very simple. You call it as a formula or just a mathematical expression. So velocity of first with respect to second, what is it? You have heard this word, right? Yes. Yeah. Velocity of first with respect to second, what is the answer? This velocity of 1 minus velocity of 2. So this is how it works. Is it clear? Yes. So this is relative velocity. If I ask you about relative displacement, S12, then it will be S1 minus S2. So basically, whatever is the prefix, the subscript that you write, you have to follow the same order. 1, 2 means 1 minus 2. 2, 1 means 2 minus 1. Okay, the same logic we'll be using in Coulomb's law. Anywhere you see in physics, there is a logic. Okay, then the third one is relative acceleration, A1 minus A2. So you'll solve problems like this. Okay, this is about. So this concept can be applied for one-dimensional relative velocity. So when it comes to two-dimensional relative velocity, what we need to do is we need to take the directions into consideration. Means acceleration along x direction between first object and second object is acceleration along x direction for first object minus acceleration along x direction for the second object. Okay, similarly, you have to do it along y direction, along z direction as well. So this is how it keeps proceeding. Okay, so first what I want you to do is start with these basic problems. The problems in this book are very good. The problems in this book, you can try out only the example ones. Okay, yes. So try them out. They'll be slightly tough also. Okay, but try them. Wherever you get stuck, mark those questions in your book and bring it to me in the next 45 minutes. Okay, 45 minutes. I want a report of how many problems you are able to solve. Once this is done, in the evening, you will be writing a test in this chapter on kinematics, somewhere around, I think, 30 marks or something. Okay, it has a timer of 1 hour. Within that 1 hour, how much ever you are able to solve, let's see, marks will get triggered, and at the same time, you will have instant solutions also. I'll tell you how to take up the test once you come with the report. Okay, I'll add you to the app. Yes. So can I add the number from which you messaged me? Yes, sir. And Dad's number is the same, right? Yes, sir. Okay, so you'll be getting the report. You can monitor. Similarly, I thought of giving a test in vector algebra also, but the questions are even more tough. So I thought vector algebra, we can have it after 2-3 days. Okay. See if you're getting a message. What is your initial? Do you get an SMS?